Hello lords and ladies, it's Sir Gawain of House Evermere. This video is going to be a bit more direct and opinionated compared to my normal content, but I wanted to get this off my chest. I love discussions about characters and stories I enjoy, especially video essays that dive deep into narrative themes and community discussions online. So when I watched Frieren, Beyond a Journey's End, I was over the moon to discover Himmel, one of my favourite characters in that show, had a King Arthur inspired backstory. Naturally, as an Arthurian legend fan, I was ecstatic. However, when I went online, I saw people labeling Himmel as the anti-King Arthur, or even a better version of King Arthur. And that's when I started to laugh. Not out of disrespect, but because Himmel and Arthur in many ways are incredibly similar. In fact, Himmel is basically a love letter to King Arthur and Arthurian legend. Now, before you get upset, hear me out. Yes, there is one major difference between the two. Himmel fails to pull the sword out of its stone, while Arthur succeeds. But people using this single difference to bash Arthur, and in doing so, they're missing the entire point of the sword and the stone in Arthurian legend. For those unfamiliar with Frieren, Himmel is a pure-hearted hero who accompanies the main character, Frieren, on their journey to slay the Demon King. He's the embodiment of heroism and determination, inspiring not only his companions, but everyone he encounters. Himmel holds a replica of the hero's sword, a weapon stuck in the stone, an obvious homage to the sword in the stone from Arthurian legend. As a child, Himmel dreamed of pulling the sword out of the stone to defeat the Demon King, declaring his ambitions to everyone, but when he finally arrived at the sword as an adult, he failed to pull it out. Despite this crushing disappointment, Himmel didn't give up. Instead, he made the declaration that even if he was a fake hero, he would keep moving forward. He didn't need the sword to do good. This moment cemented Himmel as a beautifully written character whose convictions and humility make him unforgettable. A lot of the misunderstanding about Arthur stems from conflating Excalibur, the sword of the Lady of the Lake, and Caliburn, the sword in the stone. People assumed the sword in the stone was a blessing or a gift for Arthur, similar to Excalibur, but this just simply isn't true. Caliburn is often described in Arthurian legend as a curse, or the worst thing that's ever happened to Arthur. It's crucial to understand this distinction, because it fully reframes Arthur's journey in the story. Meanwhile in Frieren, Himmel's sword isn't a burden, but a test of character. When Himmel fails to pull it out, it doesn't define his worth, it merely tests his resolve. It creates a clear distinction between the two stories. For Arthur, Caliburn is a soul-crushing responsibility. For Himmel, the hero's sword is an affirmation that he doesn't need to rely on symbols to be a hero. Himmel's conviction to keep pushing forward, even as a fake hero, is admirable, and it directly mirrors Arthur's story in Arthurian legend. Arthur also struggles with imposter syndrome. Despite pulling the sword out of the stone, he doubted whether or not he truly deserved to be king. However, like Himmel, Arthur chooses to push forward, realizing that even if he was a fake, he could still help people. So in the end, it didn't matter if he was a fake king or not. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? It's also important to remember that Himmel was a fully grown adult when he faced this soul-shattering disappointment. He had years of experience and maturity to help him process the weight of this failure. Arthur, on the other hand, was just a child, a boy around 10 to 14, when he pulled the sword Caliburn from its stone. He was woefully unprepared for the responsibility that came with the sword, thrust onto a throne with no preparation and expected to lead a kingdom. This is why comparing the two directly doesn't make any sense. Caliburn wasn't a gift for Arthur, it was a burden, a crushing weight he had to carry, whether he wanted to or not. The responsibility nearly destroyed him. Meanwhile, Himmel's sword isn't a burden, but a personal challenge he overcomes by redefining what it means to be a hero for himself. Another key distinction is that Arthur was a victim of the sword. It chose him, and ultimately it destroyed him, setting off a chain of events that led to Camelot's downfall. Himmel, by contrast, doesn't need the sword. He was already a hero before he arrived at it, which is what made this scene of self-assurance so impactful in Frieren. In Arthurian legend, however, Arthur wasn't a hero when he pulled the sword out of the stone. He wasn't a king, he wasn't a legend, he was a scared little boy, thrust into an impossible situation, yet somehow managed to turn that into the greatest kingdom in myth, forging a round table of legendary knights and inspiring tales of heroism that echo to this day. So I don't think we should be using Himmel to bash King Arthur. There's also this idea that Arthur was gifted everything because he pulled the sword out of the stone. This couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, becoming a king is a massive change from being a peasant or a squire, but it wasn't a blessing. It was a soul-shattering responsibility. Caliburn ruined Arthur's life. His mistakes as king directly contributed to Morgana's betrayal, Camelot's fall, and even Mordred's rise. To call Caliburn a gift is absurd. If anything, the true gift in Arthurian legend is Excalibur, given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake for proving himself to be a worthy king. I believe this misunderstanding stems from the conflating of the two swords, as I mentioned earlier, because people assume there is only one sword, as Excalibur is often referred to as being a blessing in Arthurian legend, compared to Caliburn, which is described as being a curse. But people think that Excalibur is the sword in the stone when it's not. So people take the blessing label and put it onto the sword in the stone, and not Excalibur. Himmel and Arthur also share the same core ideology. As I mentioned before, even if we are fake heroes or fake kings, we can still do good, so it doesn't matter if we're fake or not. However, the way they approach this belief differs. Himmel is confident to the point of vanity, which makes him endearing and steadfast. Arthur, on the other hand, is riddled with self-doubt, pushing himself beyond the brink to prove to himself more than anyone else that he is worthy. Finally, there's this claim that Arthur was chosen by fate. This is ironic because Arthur and the legends hated that narrative. Bards often exaggerated his life, saying he was destined for greatness and chosen by God. Arthur believed this to downplay his effort and sacrifice. However, he allowed the narrative to continue because he thought it might bring comfort to his people. A clever parallel to this is how Himmel's story is exaggerated in Frieren, with the world believing he pulled the sword out of the stone when he didn't, because people of the land romanticized the hero. Himmel isn't the anti-King Arthur. He's an homage to Arthurian legend. He's an alternate Arthur, a version of the character who is older, more confident, and already a hero when he faces the sword. I love Himmel, and I think he's an amazingly written character, but using him to bash Arthur just doesn't make sense. Both characters serve their own unique narrative purposes, and both are incredible in their own ways. Anyway, thank you for listening to my rant, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day, lords and ladies.